Address is expected to come under sharp focus when Treasury officials meet with rating agencies today. The pledge to give Eskom 69 billion rand over the next 3 years, which could increase to around 150 billion rand, is said to be to result in a backlash from rating firms. Moody's, which is the only rating agency that hasn't downgraded South Africa's sovereign debt to junk, has already reacted, saying that the budget highlights government's limited fiscal flexibility. But Treasury Director General Dondo Mokgajane has been quoted saying that this is unfair to say that agencies will wield the axe. Now we speak to Citadel's Martin Ackerman. Thank you so much for your time, Martin. And would I like us to start with the holes that rating agencies maybe have found in yesterday's budget delivery?
Yes, good afternoon. I think unfortunately, we're in the red zone, meaning that, the fiscal framework actually deteriorated again compared to the October budget and February's budget last year. And we almost with our backs against the wall because our debt to GDP is going slightly above 60%. The fiscal deficit is 4.5%. So that's the numbers that, the rating agencies doesn't want to see. So I think from that point only, that actually warrants a downgrade. So they will definitely focus more probably now on how we're going to try and reduce those metrics going forward. And that boils down to one thing, and that's economic growth. So if we can get economic growth going, then obviously a lot of those numbers can reduce over time, and obviously your tax collection will increase. So that will be the focus going forward in terms of policy, and not only policy, but the implementation of that policy to actually get that growth going. I think what is also a major concern still for the rating agencies is the fact that, there's one positive. We didn't take over the Eskom debt, but the debt is still there. So we provided some cash flow over the next 3 years that they probably will use through the restructuring to service the interest. But this morning, Eskom is exactly in the same position they've been yesterday, with a lot of debt outstanding that they need to service and not really having more capacity to support an economy that should actually grow at 3%. So I think that is a concern, because given the fact that we already, like I said, with our backs against the wall, if there's one wrong step from Eskom specifically, then we definitely way in the red danger zone, and a downgrade is in a guarantee.
And as we speak of Eskom among the group of struggling state-owned entities, as well as government's funding of these SOEs, the minister mentioned a word policy and policy frameworks. How do those two then meet, especially where South Africa needs to be dealing with the funding model of state-owned entities? We were expecting the minister to give much detail, particularly on Eskom as well as SAA and the SABC, but the focus was mostly on Eskom. How are rating agencies expected to read this, with the high priority being on the funding model as opposed to ensuring that the policy framework in its entirety discusses and addresses the issues faced by SOEs?
Yeah, I think it's for all of them. There's two issues. The one is running the entity efficiently, and that is already being addressed with new boards and sorting out mismanagement and corruption. And then the other thing is obviously getting onto a financial path that's more sustainable. So there's two issues for most of these state-owned enterprises that needs to be addressed. And yes, you're right, they only focus mostly on Eskom because that is now the elephant in the room. But also Eskom is crucial for the South African economy, because if something happens to Eskom, that's why they say it's too big to fail. That's got a major impact on the economy every day. So that's why we need to get that up and running. So yes, the agencies will watch those two things in terms of, are we making any traction in terms of the changes that's already been in place in terms of boards and governance? And then what is the plan in terms of servicing the debt? But also, very importantly, can we see that the debt levels are actually stabilizing at these levels and that we don't see further increases in debt. And that's part of the plan to actually unbundle Eskoms to say, well, by doing that, we can get into a situation where they don't need to keep on borrowing. And if, on the other hand, you sort out corruption, you can actually then get to a level where you can service the current debt, but you don't increase that further from these levels.
Corruption is an element that the Finance Minister indicated in his delivery of the 2019 budget in Parliament yesterday. Is this going to be one of those tickets that they use in their engagements with rating agencies to demonstrate that South Africa is making some sort of gains in trying to deal with the scourge of corruption?
Yeah, I think, the budget it's a tough budget. The numbers are tough, but that's just a reflection of where we are at this point in time. There's almost no room to maneuver, so at least they've been very honest about it to say this is what we are seeing, this is what we're dealing with. So now what I think the rating agents are looking for is to say, well, you did spend a lot of time in the budget speech focusing on what we're going to do, the policy, the plan that is in place for the state and enterprise, but also within government to increase revenue, to cut back on expenditure. In an election year, to say that there won't be any salary increases for parliament members, that's very brave. To make a statement about early retirement. So they definitely had the right message in the budget. But the rating agency today will basically say that that's just on paper. So what we need to see is that what's on the paper gets over into action. Implementation. And then with those actions, can we then get to these numbers or hopefully even better numbers that's currently in the budget on the papers?
And at times, given past history, South Africa has seemingly failed where implementation is concerned. And I also want to find out your overall view of whether this is a sustainable budget on the domestic front, given the current economic challenges that we face, including the continued slow growth.
I think the budget is a very realistic picture of what we are facing at this point in time. What concerns me is the fact that there's no margin of safety, in the sense that, if something really goes bad with whether it's Eskom or SOE and they actually come and knock on government's door for more money, that will just push us way over the cliff. And that's unfortunate. So what we really hope for is that with all the focus on accelerating policy for economic development and growth and the focus on the infrastructure fund and infrastructure development, that those things in time will actually result in higher growth numbers. Because bottom line, that's what we need. If we can get growth going and growth can be more sustainable, then, that will again create us some margin of safety, that if something goes wrong, we've got some way to move into. So I think, yes, this budget is, it is possible to deliver on this budget. But there's not a lot of room for making an error or getting lower growth. That will again put a lot of pressure on these estimates come October this year. So we need to start working now to make sure that we can actually deliver on these numbers. Otherwise, it will be too late.
Martin, it's often described around budget time that it's a tricky balancing act. Do you think that the minister achieved that, especially where public sentiment is concerned from both the business side as well as ordinary South Africans? The new dawn, so to speak, has it come with that wave of positive sentiment?
Yeah, I do think that if you listen to the speech or if you watch the minister on television, it was a continuation of SONA, so a lot of confidence, very serious about we here to turn this around. We want to do business, so that's all positive. I think he almost inherited the current situation, and that's why he needs to deal with what is around us in terms of the environment, and at least be honest about it, not making promises that's definitely not achievable. So as painful as that might be, I think if he is serious and if he can remain Minister of Finance for the next 3 years, then we've got a good chance to deliver. Part of our problem we had over the past couple of years is we had so many ministers of finance that you don't get continuity. Mm-hmm. So there's no one that actually takes a budget or a framework over 3 years and then execute on it and take responsibilities to see that we actually deliver.
All right.
So if we get a new Minister of Finance every 6-9 months, no one is taking responsibility really for the previous budget, and it's just restarting the process. So I think that was all positive, and if we can stick to that, then definitely we will see results longer term.
Thank you for your time, Martin Ackerman from Citadel, giving more reaction to the 2019 budget speech. Meanwhile, Finance Minister Tito Mboweni has indicated that South Africa will have a new South African Revenue Service Commissioner within weeks, and that the tax collection agency is being strengthened by new units to combat illicit trade as well as tax evasion. Mboweni has further said that SARS IT system will also be beefed up. He further indicated that tax revenue shortfall is expected to come in at 42.8 billion rand this year, a worsening of 15.4 billion rand on October estimates, and this is due partly to the poor economy but also to backlogs in VAT refunds that built up under the tenure of former Commissioner Tom Moyane. Mboweni says SARS' new larger business unit will be launched in April, and a new illicit economy unit was launched in August that was to combat the illegal trade in cigarettes and tobacco, which is costing the fiscus billions in lost revenue. Similar units were scrapped by former Commissioner Moyane during his reign. In a briefing ahead of his speech, Mboweni referred to a courtesy visit that SARS made this week when assets of alleged tobacco smuggler Adriano Mazzotti were seized in relation to unpaid taxes. The minister has warned that similar visits would come.